Honorable Senators, I stand before you today for my first speech in the upper chamber.
I'm sure that all of you remember your first speech. It is a solemn moment that comes with its own worries. When you first rose yourself, you probably felt the room become suddenly wider and much warmer. That's exactly how I feel today. Je veux d'abord reconnaître.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the banks of the Ottawa River, on the traditional and unceded ancestral territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I want to honor their history, their culture, and their essential contribution as custodians of this land, while reaffirming my commitment to reconciliation and a future in which the rights of Indigenous people are finally fully recognized.
Senator White accurately stated in her poignant speech last week that Indigenous peoples in Canada have a rightful place in the fabric of this nation. I could not agree more.
This vast Anishinaabe territory stretches along both sides of the Ottawa and St. Lawrence rivers, on the banks of which I was born, one of 4 boys, in Verchères, Quebec. It's a rural area where large tracts of farmland are still farmed today, and where, at the time, my father, Jean-Marie, his father, and his brothers ran a dairy farm.
Senator Platt, in his welcoming remarks, was right. This is where I learned the meaning of resilience and hard work, such qualities shared by those who work the land.
In 1939, my father, Jean-Marie, and his brother, Laurent, volunteered to join the Royal Canadian Air Force on the European front during the Second World War. As members of the Royal Acadian group, Laurent was a bombardier and, at just 26, the oldest member of the crew aboard the aircraft. My father, 2 years his junior, was a tail gunner in another Lancaster bomber. He was demobilized in 1944 after his brother had made the ultimate sacrifice of his life. They are among the Canadian heroes who contributed to the surrender of Nazi Germany, the liberation of France, and the return of peace to Europe. My uncle Laurent was one of the 42,000 Canadians who died in combat between 1939 and 1945. Today, we owe them a duty to remember and commemorate their sacrifice for peace and freedom. Of course, my father is a war hero, but for me, he was my hero all his life. At a very young age, following the death of his own father, he ensured the continuity of the family farm and became involved in his community, first as mayor, then as prefect, and finally as president of the mayors of Quebec's rural municipalities.
That's how my 3 brothers and I learned from him the importance of public service, democracy, the value of hard work, and honesty. Today, as a senator at the heart of this institution that is an integral part of Canadian democracy, I will make it my duty to uphold the values that were instilled in me as a child.
Last September, on the day I was sworn in, you all gave me the honor of a very warm welcome. Senator Tanis kindly conducted an archival search of the senatorial district of Les Laurentides, which I am honored to represent. He evoked with equity the remarkable character of those that preceded me in this office. J'en profite pour saluer ma
I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to my predecessor, Senator Renée Dupuis, for her exceptional contribution to the work of this House, and whose considerable work focuses in particular on the importance of fully recognizing the rights of Indigenous peoples. I would like to thank Senator Saint-Germain, who has been kind and generous enough to mention my past achievements at the Quebec National Assembly. Dear colleagues, I must tell you, however, that political experience has long taught me that the people around us contribute even more to our success than we do ourselves. So it is to them that I would like to direct the compliments so kindly addressed to me by Senator Saint-Germain. Senator Gold, thank you for your kind words about me, but especially for the hand you so generously extended to me during my first days in Ottawa. You have given me sound advice on the role of senators and the importance of working as a team. Senator Laboucan-Bettis will no doubt note with acuity these words that I'm saying now. Parliamentarism implies that we sometimes oppose the ideas of others, even vehemently. However, this opposition must never, ever be at the expense of respect for the individuals who express them. I'll draw inspiration from your teachings, and like you, I will always keep my door open to discuss and exchange ideas with my colleagues. The quality and sincerity of our relationships will only improve as a result. I would like to take this opportunity to add my voice to those of my fellow senators who have highlighted your important contribution to this institution, and I wish you an excellent retirement. On November 21st, I joined the Progressive Group in the Senate. Senator Delphon welcomed me with open arms. He rightly highlighted my commitment to public service and did me the honor of appointing me to succeed him on the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee and to join him on the National Finance Committee. I would like to thank him. And believe me, Senators, you'll be working very hard soon. I would like to thank him sincerely for this mark of confidence.
My gratefulness to each of the members of my group, our veterans, as well as our new recruits. I will count on your immense talent and your expertise to guide my steps in this chamber as we continue our important work under the leadership of Senator Francis. Thank you for welcoming me. You are an amazing group. À mon parrain, le sénateur Gignac.
To my sponsor, Senator Gignac, with whom I had the honor of serving in the Quebec government, I would like to reiterate my esteem and friendship. Everyone recognized his competence and expertise in economic matters, and I feel privileged to have been able to benefit from his advice on many occasions, both in my ministerial functions and later as a political analyst at Radio-Canada. My entry into this chamber also coincided with Franco-Ontarian Day, which Senator Mention so eloquently celebrated. I share her love of this language, which, in her words, is distinguished by the richness of its colors, the diversity of its accents, and the beauty of its expressions. I want to give it the importance it deserves in every speech I make. In fact, the Right Honourable Stephen Harper, in his speeches that he systematically began in French, rightly reminded us that Francophones are an inescapable part of the foundation and perpetuation of Canada. I would add that this language, with its American accents, must resonate throughout our country.
In my maiden speech at the Quebec National Assembly in 2003, I raised the issue of judiciary independence regarding administrative judges. I intended to make administrative justice more equitable, accessible, and that within their domain, the administrative judges would be independent as are justices of superior courts across Canada. Force est d'admettre que depuis 2000...
Since 2003, the world has changed. Today, even the independence of higher court judges is under threat in societies where political interference seeks to compromise the rule of law and the necessary independence of the judiciary. As His Majesty the King said in the speech from the throne, democracy, pluralism, the rule of law, self-determination, and freedoms are values that Canadians hold dear, values that the government is determined to protect." End quote. The rule of law is the very foundation of any democratic society, and the independence of the judiciary ensures that it is respected. Judges must be able to issue decisions based solely on the rule of law. The separation of powers is the founding principle of this independence in that it guarantees the impartial treatment of citizens before the courts and the state. Like the rule of law, judicial independence guarantees human dignity and respect for human rights. It enables judges to resist outside interference. However, under the influence of fear, exacerbated populism, dehumanization, or individuals greedy for absolute power, democracy is retreating. Many regimes have attacked the independence of their judicial institutions, while others have completely overturned the independence of their judiciary in favor of oppressive and arbitrary governments. There are many examples of this, unfortunately. Indian judges are crumbling under the weight of lawsuits because the Modi government refuses to adhere to an impartial appointment process. Salvadoran judges were dismissed and punished by Bukele's government, which instead wanted to make partisan appointments on its behalf. Ecuadorian judges are having to navigate between the increasing militarization of their government, decisions surrounding the corruption of some of their colleagues, and the very violence of drug traffickers. Judges in the Philippines who, as Amnesty International reported, were killed under the Duterte government for defending the independence of the judiciary. The lives of women judges in Afghanistan are under threat because they have convicted Taliban terrorists and are now being hunted down by them. Judges in the United States of America, France, and Israel have been targeted by campaigns of discrediting and defamation for upholding validly adopted laws designed to counter the administrative decisions of the executive or sanction the misconduct of one of its members. In Canada, it is easy to take for granted that these cardinal rules are part of the founding principles of any democratic society. But, as we know, all democracies are fragile, and Canada's is no exception. We ourselves have had politicians who suddenly and inexplicably thought it wise to criticize the courts and judges and publicly challenge their decisions. The direct consequence of these criticisms and attacks is to erode public confidence in the administration of justice and to undermine the authority of the courts. For example, a few years ago, members of the executive attacked the integrity of the Right Honourable Beverly McLaughlin, then Chief Justice of Canada, when the Supreme Court rejected an appointment proposed by the executive and deemed inadequate within the meaning of the law. More recently, some of our provincial premiers have also seen fit to declare that judges are engaging in legal activism, that politicizing the appointments process would increase the incarceration rate, or that federally appointed judges are incapable of interpreting provincial laws. Honourable colleagues, here in Canada, we must remember the importance of judicial independence and, through it, our attachment to the rule of law, which guarantees the permanence of the institutions of a free society. That's why I chose as my first act as senator to table Bill S-219, instituting Judicial Independence Day in Canada. This bill follows the initiative taken by the International Association of Judges, which asked the United Nations to declare January 11th International Judicial Independence Day, commemorating the March of 1,000 Dresses. On January 11th, 2020, hundreds of Polish judges marched through the streets of Warsaw alongside rather numerous fellow judges from other European democracies to express their opposition to attacks on judicial independence as the Polish parliament attempted to revoke the principle of the irremovability of judges. Bill S-219 is therefore, secondly, a gesture of support for the appeal of others, a gesture of remembrance for this event, and a gesture of solidarity. It also underscores Canada's commitment to the efforts of the UN and the International Union of Judges to protect judicial independence and safeguard the rule of law. This independence includes appointment processes based on the merit of candidates and impartial, transparent, and fair disciplinary mechanisms. The security of tenure of judges must be guaranteed, as must their administrative autonomy and financial security, in order to ensure the smooth running of the courts and the serenity of the judiciary.
Through partisan political attacks, judges are unwillingly drawn into political debates in which they cannot and should not become involved. The duty of restraint and impartiality to which judges are bound protect them, but it also makes them vulnerable since they are condemned to suffer under the political assaults brought against their judgment and sometimes even against their person. When the judiciary comes under frontal attack from the executive, only the people can offer themselves as a bulwark in safeguarding judicial independence and hence the rule of law. This is what the judges in Poland understood when they demonstrated peacefully. They sought public support by denouncing the executive overstep and the dangers to which it exposed human rights. Honourable colleagues, by reaffirming judicial independence through this bill, the Government of Canada, as an extension of its population, will refuse to trivialize attacks on the judiciary and will reaffirm its commitment to the rule of law. Parliament does not speak in vain. Le caractère déclaratoire du projet de loi est
The declaratory nature of the bill is expressed in its preamble, where it emphasizes in particular that the rule of law is fundamental to the maintenance of a democratic society and respect for human rights, that maintaining the rule of law relies on a judiciary made up of impartial judges who are independent of pressure and attempts at political interference. That is why the third objective of this bill is to proclaim that even in the most envied democracies in the world, and I think Canada is one of them, it is necessary to stress the importance of the judiciary, since it is one of the foundations of the rule of law.
The duty to educate and inform belongs to all branches of government. Judges are condemned to silence outside their judgments, but the very function of rendering judgment is to be the expression and application of our public values in response to wrongful actions. The legitimacy of the courts also rests on the public's trust that justice will be rendered impartially and publicly. It presupposes that we agree on the laws that govern us and then that we all hold ourselves accountable for applying them impartially. The bill will therefore enable judicial institutions to promote their public information and awareness activities, particularly among young citizens. I sincerely wish that this bill be a tangible expression of my desire to inscribe myself into the active role the Senate plays in the democratic life of our country. If this bill is adopted by both chambers, Canada would be the first democratic country in the world to recognize with a law the Day of Judicial Independence, and by this act formally express its commitment to the rule of law. I respectfully look forward to your support towards the adoption of this bill. Comme membre de la Chambre haute, j'ai maintenant comme tout.
As a member of the upper chamber, I now have a duty, like all my honorable colleagues, to raise awareness of the fundamental role played by the Senate as a democratic counterweight, a defender of the regions and minorities, a bearer of voices that are sometimes ignored in the other chamber, and a guarantor of in-depth reflection on the legislative process. Even in a democracy like ours, excesses of power can jeopardize balance and justice. For example, when a government enjoys an overwhelming majority in the House of Commons, it is essential to have an institution capable of scrutinizing legislative decisions carefully and independently. This is where the Senate comes in a spirit free of any political axe to grind. The Honourable Senator Serge Joyal was fond of saying that the Senate acts as our country's collective conscience. For my part, I believe that our institution must transcend partisan issues and focus essentially on the common good of all Canadians in all matters submitted to it. In this, we can be guided by our shared values. Because let's remember that our belonging to this great country is not based on the color of our skin, the language we speak, or the people we love, but on the values we share.
Fortunately, the Senate is not frozen in time. The reform initiated, which entailed nonpartisan nominations based on the merit of candidates, aims to fundamentally strengthen its independence. I inscribe myself fully in this initiative. It will enable the Senate to adapt in accordance with ever-changing political realities and to ensure its legitimacy endures in the eye of the public and of future generations.
In conclusion, we have to agree that being one of the 105 Canadians chosen to sit in the Senate is in itself an immense privilege. However, we all know that it would not be possible to devote ourselves to this public commitment without the love and generosity of our loved ones. I can never express enough my gratitude, appreciation, and love to my wife, Michelle, who has been by my side for 40 years now. Her work as a federal judge, which she has carried out brilliantly for 25 years now on the Quebec Superior Court, has not always fitted in easily with my life in active politics. Her obligation to keep a low profile meant that we were not able to spend a great deal of my elected life together. However, I knew she was always there, close to me, like a quiet force, a reassuring presence, an unfailing ally. She is still there today. Michelle, you are the love of my life. We are blessed to have our daughters Elizabeth and Carolyn, and now our granddaughters Jeanne and Madeleine, brightening our lives. It's generally said that apples don't fall very far from the tree. If that's the case, like their mother and grandmother, they are and will become wonderful women. Together, they allow me to fulfill my potential. I'm delighted to share my life with you.
Senator Martin.
Yes.
Pardon, Senator Matters. You have a...
Yes. I'll wait till the festivities die down a little. Today, Supreme Court of Canada Chief Justice Richard Wagner gave his annual news conference in Ottawa. He did make some national news out of that as he commented on some matters. I'm not sure if that was a result of questions that he received, but it may well have been, which could be considered controversial. As senators, we occasionally have the rare opportunity of being able to question brand new Supreme Court of Canada judges. When they're first potentially going to be appointed, we have the opportunity to go as members of the Legal Committee, just like the House of Commons sends members of their Justice Committee to go and ask some very restrained questions to these brand new members of the court before they're formally appointed. But those questions were always informed, must be very restrained, and were in fact given quite a bit of restrictions on what we can ask in those situations. So what I'm just wondering is, what do you think of the Chief Justice Wagner having these annual press conferences, and yet on the rare opportunity when we are able to ask questions to someone who's just being newly appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada? Do you think that that's something that can result in, obviously you cannot control a press conference like you can potentially one of these Supreme Court appointment processes. What do you think of that juxtaposition that we might have, where a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is giving a press conference and potentially commenting on issues that could be quite controversial and could even be matters that might be a matter that eventually are heard by the court.
Senator Moreau.
Thank you for your question, Senator. Well, I think that the Chief Justice of Canada has a duty to explain to all Canadians the importance of the judiciary and what they're doing at the Supreme Court and in every court of justice in Canada. And this being said, I'm totally at ease to see the Chief Justice of Canada telling Canadians what it is that the judicial function are. And I think that it is a good exercise that will remind Canadians how important it is in a free society like Canada and in a democracy as Canada to maintain the separation of power between the justice, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary system. So I think that those press conferences are a very good example of what should be done, and I'm sure that the Chief Justice of Canada has the authority and the restriction necessary to respect that separation of power.
Senator Batters.
Thank you. Something else with respect to this, since especially Senator Moreau, as you just commented on the need for the Supreme Court of Canada to fully inform Canadians as to what's going on with the judiciary across Canada. But something I was a little surprised to see is earlier this year, I think at the end of February, the Supreme Court of Canada decided to no longer use Twitter. They sent out a tweet that said, dear subscribers, moving forward, we will be focusing our communications efforts on other platforms. We invite you to follow us on our LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube accounts to continue receiving our updates. Thank you for your support. So I certainly understand, being someone in politics, and the vitriol that you can receive online, especially on Twitter. However, it is a platform that allows an institution like the Supreme Court to send out important messages to people that may not otherwise receive them. What do you think of that, given what you were just saying about the need for the Supreme Court and its justices to be able to inform Canadians?
Senator Moreau.
Thank you for your question. Well, I've been in active politics for more than 15 years, and I never used Twitter as a way to expose what I think to my fellow citizen. And I think that it is a very clever thing for the Supreme Court of Canada not to use Twitter as a way to reach Canadians. There are other means, and I think that there are better means than Twitter to do that. And in that sense, I totally support the idea of the Supreme Court of Canada.